Hey, this is John. Today I just want to talk a little bit about the economics governing universities, just to give you an idea of how to think about that. Some of you are probably not going to find it very interesting, but I do think it has a lot of explanatory power. I will give a sort of half solution to the problem, though I hesitate to do that mainly because there are drawbacks to that kind of solution, right? Okay, so anyways, by the way, if you are interested this week, I'm reading Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, very sort of light reading, but you can check that out if you're interested. Okay, cool. So today I do have a paper from Martin, and it's from 2016. It's basically about the hierarchies of the university. So if you're wondering, there's sort of three main organizational hierarchies that are proposed, and that's basically top-down organization, where you have, say, a single individual or a set of individuals who pass orders down to the bottom, and then that gets managed like that. The other main one is going to be a decentralized structure. If you want, you can think of top-down as centralized, because decentralized isn't exactly thought of as bottom-up. But the other one is decentralized, right? So you have these different units that all participate sort of autonomously, and then they have some kind of linkage that brings them together at the end through, just some kind of common business mechanism that unites them. But otherwise, they're autonomous, and then you have hybrids between the two, right? And the main difference between these sort of centralized and decentralized structures is to do with autonomy, right? That's also the main sort of criterion used for distinguishing which one to use in business. So, for example, this article is basically about how universities organize from a top-down central structure rather than, say, a decentralized structure, even though they would benefit from a decentralized structure. And in the case of universities, it's kind of obvious to explain this because they have these extremely specialized departments that then if you take these people who, I think, one, probably don't even visit the departments often, if at all, to be honest, but also two, that they can't possibly have expertise across all these different domains, making decisions for these departments, such as, what kinds of things to track, how to deliver your material, what kinds of things we ought to focus on in research. So, for example, one of the criticisms here is regarding research metrics, right? And I certainly noticed that in my time when I was at university. But anyway, so you can read the article, but it's pretty sort of straightforward in its representation. I mean, I think a lot of it is rhetorical, right? Because they do suggest that basically all of the evidence says a decentralized structure would be better. Why then does a university organize from a top-down structure? And, I think that even when they propose these sort of, potential reasons for that, that also is kind of hitting the nail on the head, right? Because they describe it as potentially being a drive for economic efficiency. And, that brings me to the main point of this video, which is the answer is probably yes. And the reason I would arrive at that answer is because so far there doesn't seem to be an alternative brought to my attention that explains sort of clearly a lot of the problems in the degree market, right? So what are some of those problems then? Well, like we talked about with the, for example, the use of metrics attached to research. And this is also something that, so you can listen to Dr. Johanna's Akil Niederhauser on YouTube as well, who mainly talks about German philosophy, but he did also create a video on the corporate nature of universities. though from a bit of a different lens. He's mainly using that to advocate for an independent intellectual life, and that's fine too. But anyways, he also brings up the idea that, well, research is seemingly based on output, not quality, right? And so sometimes, well, what's my point about metrics like that? My point about metrics like that is that they don't really focus sometimes on the core of the business when they're set by people who don't really understand exactly what's going on. And you can see this in big business as well. It's not limited to, say, just public enterprises, which are, some universities at least. But, big businesses do that too. That is part of the ethos focusing on standardization as a means to achieve economies of scale. If you do not, or, if you will, the main reason to make a lot of these changes is to standardize things so that it's easier to expand. That does have a lot of drawbacks. One of them is often going to be quality of product. I will also briefly mention, though I said this before, one of the other problems sort of arising from the profit incentive of the universities seems to be that you have a swath of individuals who I would say, and I think now it's been made more clear, that probably should not have been admitted to the university, who are admitted to the universities. And why is this driven by profit? Well, it's kind of obvious. They bring more people in, and sure, whether more people fail or not is kind of irrelevant to them. They collect a paycheck. Though it is preferable to have people go through, because then they pay for more years, right? That's more profitable. Okay, so that's another issue that is explained by that, apparently. So, and then there's also, the rise in support staff that they mention here, and I'll just briefly kind of scroll through to see if I have anything else to kind of bring up in that respect. That's important. I am going to make the video short. We are kind of in the middle of a heat wave right now, and so I'm rather disgusting. So, yeah. Okay. I would say that I do have some more stuff to say on the problems with increasing the number of degrees in the market in this way, and the way that it does disturb the lives of the consumer, in this case, the people who hold degrees, right? And sort of unnecessarily. Aside from that, I don't think there's anything else in particular to talk about with problems. Now, something I do really like that they say here is they use the example of a boiling frog. And so they describe a set of experiments that seem to show that if you place a frog in hot water, it will jump out immediately, right? If you toss it in boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you put a frog in cold water and then sort of simmer until it gradually gets to a boiling temperature, then the frog will let itself be cooked in that manner. And so it's kind of an interesting analogy to describe the way that sort of these junk changes seep into our lives and some of the things that we consider perhaps even precious over time, and that maybe we accept that as a result of conditioning along the way. Okay. Now, as a main sort of solution to, the let's say practical solution, because obviously, well, what's even the point of, say, critiquing economic incentives of an institution if your point isn't necessarily going to be to, say, upheave the economic system altogether, which I think in some cases is, in some respects is probably necessary, but it's also too radical to be plausible, not even necessarily given its effectiveness, but more to do with the fact there are so many proponents that are against that kind of thinking that even if it were effective, it still wouldn't be ever realistically on the negotiation table. So anyways, a more sort of practical solution that I think would generally resolve a lot of issues, at least for the consumer in the marketplace, is a sort of getting away from standardization and focusing on standards generally. But there are obviously drawbacks for that. One, for example, is that, if we suppose that they increased the standards to, say, high school, yes, you would have fewer people kind of entering university and then failing because they weren't prepared. And, in some cases, apparently, though, I do kind of doubt the truth of this. Some articles, I think, really misunderstand the plight of the current generations, perhaps even deliberately blockheaded. But apparently some people do enter without being able to read a sentence, right? Should those people be at university? I don't want to make a controversial statement. I don't think saying that no is a controversial statement, though. So anyways, but, suppose you did increase the standard, say, even just exiting out of high school. Well, there are drawbacks to that, like, people not having opportunities, maybe if they were just simply sort of like stupid kids, as a lot of, unruly teenagers are. Should those people necessarily have problems, navigating that? Well, okay, sure. Well, one way to get around that, though, is with standardized testing, right? Anyways, so that does kind of help the consumer. It, and like kind of not wasting time and money, I would say. Then also kind of, having downstream effects on degrees, lowering the supply of degrees, blah, blah, blah. And also upholding their standard as well, because there's a lot of, I would say again, a lot of just faulty rhetoric surrounding the standard degree, though there is certainly some truth to that. That does make it perceptibly less desirable for employment, right, in the entry market. So then on, the side of, say, universities focusing on standards, well, the main way that they would maybe resolve these issues is switching to a decentralized structure as proposed in, this paper. And that does put more trust in the hands of the standards set by the experts in those domains. Aside from the obvious problems, though, like the obvious problem being, like, why do they want to centralize in the first place? Well, it's obviously a power grab, right? If all the evidence to explain how it would benefit the university and its structures and its consumers and so on can be, wiped away, then it's, I think, obviously a power grab, right? Because what other benefits does it have at that point? But aside from that, one of the things that you do lose with a decentralized structure is going to be control, which in some cases is valuable, right? If it were good for organization. So, for example, would it be best for the totality of the finances of the university to be handled from a centralized perspective? Well, maybe. Would it be useful for the totality of the marketing department to be handled from a centralized central locus? I'm not sure if that makes any more sense than what I was going to say, but yeah. Also, maybe, yeah. Does it make sense for management necessarily to be centralized? No, not really. Right. So there is give and take there as well. It's not like the solution is so cut and dry, though that's again where you can kind of adopt some of these hybrid structures. Yeah. Okay. That's all I'm going to say today. That probably is not comprehensive, but okay. Cool. That's the outro. Bye.